we sent David Suzuki down to New York to talk with him. Here is David Suzuki with Isaac Asimov.
Probably no writer has done more to make science intelligible to the lay person, or to excite the imagination to the fantasies of science fiction than Isaac Asimov. And he's here to be with us on 90 Minutes Live. We're interviewing him actually in the Hayden Planetarium in New York City. Actually, I think Isaac Asimov was cloned many years ago, because it seems that everywhere I look, I either see an article written by him or about him. So here to be with us is one of his clones to explain the world of science fiction and Isaac Asimov's mind. Isaac, I'd like to begin with some kind of rounding out of who you are as a person. I know you have a photographic memory. At what age in your life did you become aware that you had this special ability?
Well, I don't know that the memory was actually photographic, but I became aware I had an extremely good memory, an instant recall, as soon as I went to school, because it was clear to me that everybody else had to have things explained, and that once it was explained, they forgot it. And I didn't. It was a clear difference, and I enjoyed it.
At what point in your childhood did you feel that you wanted to become a scientist, where that was quite clear?
Well, I suppose it was when I started reading science fiction at the age of 9. I became interested in science, and I loved it. And at first, I thought I wanted to be a doctor, because that's what my parents told me I wanted to be. But by the time I got into college and discovered that I didn't particularly like zoology, but I did like chemistry very much, I decided what I really wanted to be was a chemist. And so I applied for medical school with kind of record lack of ambition, and I didn't get in, which annoyed my father extremely, and annoyed me a little too, because I hated failing, but I was relieved just the same. I would much rather have been accepted and refused, you see.
Right.
And then I went out for chemistry, and I never doubted after that I would be a scientist.
When did your writing career start in terms of popularizing science?
Oh, that didn't start until after I had gotten my PhD and become an assistant professor of biochemistry. That was when I first started. In 1954, I wrote my first popular science book, and I had written articles on popular science for a couple of years before that. But, you know, that was a logical progression, because I had started writing science fiction while I was still in college. I sold my first science fiction story at the age of 18, when I was, I guess, just started my senior year in college. And I had been writing science fiction for something like 16 years before I started writing popular science.
Really? Did you have instant success in terms of publishing your science fiction article, the first one?
Oh, heavens no. You know, I've been writing since I was 11, but just for my own amusement. And then when I was 18, I thought I would try to submit something for publication. And the first thing I submitted on June 21st, 1938, was rejected instantly. And so was the second thing, so was the third thing. I suffered and slaved for 4 months before I sold anything. But I did make my first sale on October 21st, 1938, 4 months to the day for my first submission.
Well, that's not bad. It's hardly years and years of futile striving before the first success.
Those 4 months seemed very long to me at the time.
Something probably a lot of people don't realize is that Isaac Asimov not only writes science fiction, he also puts out books of dirty limericks. Isn't that right?
3 books of lecherous limericks. Lecherous limericks, more lecherous limericks, still more lecherous limericks. And the hallmark of these limericks I write is that they are cleverer than they are filthy. That means that they can't be very filthy, because it becomes difficult to be cleverer than filthy if they're very filthy, you understand.
That's right. Are you going to give us any examples?
Sure, if you want one.
No, I want more than one.
You want more than one? I'll give you a few. A well-known reporter, Clark Kent, had a simpering, mild-mannered bent, but he seized Lois Lane and made it quite plain what his cognomen Superman meant. Or...
This is late-night television. You can be a little more risque than that.
Very good. How about this? At a bullfight, Jose made his bid. When his girlfriend said yes, he was rid of all inhibitions. And despite the conditions, when the crowd yelled, "Ole!" Jose did. Or there was a young girl from Decatur who went out to sea on a freighter. She was screwed by the master, an utter disaster. But the crew all made up for it later.
I love it. I love it. One more.
One more. All right, there was an old maid of Peru who vowed that she never would screw except under stress of forceful duress, like, "I'm ready, babe, how about you?"
Who are the young Asimovs coming up? Do you see among the current crop of young science fiction writers some very good ones?
Oh, gee, far too many. The least they can do is wait for me to pass on. But right now, my favorite amongst the younger writers is a young man named John Varley, who's about 6'4" or so, and extremely good looking, and far too big for me to beat up. And every story he writes is just terrific, I think. And I had better continue writing nonfiction, because if he keeps it up, they're liable to forget I ever wrote science fiction. I have tried to tell him he's playing with fire, because I'm a ferocious person when this happens, but he just laughs genially, looking down at me, and well, what the heck.
John Varley.
John Varley.
Any
good
other,
man.
no other names come to... How about Ursula Le Guin? That must be...
Ursula Le Guin, of course, is a middle-aged woman, so she's only of the new generation in that she started writing science fiction late in life. But she is, of course, a powerful writer. And in the most, year after year, when they take votes amongst the fans for favorite writer, the top three, sort of by reflex, are Robert Heinlein, Isaac Asimov, and Arthur Clarke. I don't think anyone thinks they're allowed to say anyone else in the first three. But below that, there's shifting. And in the most recent poll, Ursula K. Le Guin finished in 4th place,
Really?
which is, as far as she's allowed to go up, until one of us three dies. But right now, she's the most honored member of the science fiction fraternity. Gets constant Hugos, Nebulas, and all sorts of things.
I often wonder whether science fiction writers are a breed apart.
I honestly don't think so. I don't know other groups of human beings as thoroughly and as well as science fiction writers, so that perhaps I can't really judge and make comparisons. But my instinctive feeling is that if science fiction writers have something which marks them off from others, it's an unusually intense intelligence. By all odds, science fiction writers are fearfully bright, and this sometimes leads to unhappy childhoods and unhappy adult lives as well. It's almost as though they're too bright to fit into ordinary humanity. Fortunately, I'm not that bright, so I fit in and I'm generally pretty happy and so on.
I find personally, now I'm not in your league at all, but that science is moving so rapidly, it's just boggling to my mind. I think, my God, science is like fiction. As a science fiction writer, do you find that in fact real science is almost as fantastic as the fictionalized stories?
Yes, it is. And generally, I'm extremely conservative. Back in the early 50s, I predicted pocket computers for several thousand years in the future. They're here. I predicted space stations gathering energy back in 1941. I predicted it for many centuries in the future. They could be here within 15 years if we really tried hard. Back in 39, when I talked about the first trip to the moon, I placed it 10 years later than it really happened. So that there is a tendency for science to outrace even the imaginations of science fiction writers, unless they're smart enough to talk about things that can probably never be. Of course, if I write books and novels about galactic empires, I'm safe. There isn't going to be Oh yeah, I'm sorry I said that. There isn't going to be a galactic empire in my lifetime unless one comes to us and says, would you like to join? They'd be crazy. We don't qualify yet.
Are you saying, with the examples you've just given, that science fiction writers are really very poor prophets?
Yes, yes. Very few science fiction stories have anything in them that's going to come true. The only thing that makes science fiction writers remarkable as prophets is that although they're very poor prophets, everybody else is even poorer. so that they shine by contrast. The good science fiction writer trying to invent a future knows enough about science and knows enough about society to try to invent a reasonable, rational future so that it will sound plausible and be more effective and get him more money, so to speak. And therefore, he frequently puts in something which actually comes to pass. It's a very small percentage of the things he does put in, but that's more than other people do.
I think I remember you gave an example of a man way, way back who was predicting when the oil ran out.
Yes, but it's always safest to predict the obvious. Back in 1933, a man called Lawrence Manning wrote a story called The Man Who Awoke, in which a man going 3,000 years into the future discovered a world in which all the oil and coal had been burnt up 3,000 years before, and they lived a very constricted life without energy. Now, Lawrence Manning didn't have the foresight to predict nuclear energy or the use of solar energy or some of the other options, but he did see that if we kept on burning the coal and oil, we'd burn them all up. And this anyone could see if they stopped to think about it, you see, but no one stops to think about it. But I read that story 40 years ago, and I've been worried ever since.
Let me ask you a number of words or phrases. Just throw them out at you, and you give me what your immediate reaction will be.
Okay.
Terrific, okay? I'd like to start out with colonies in outer space.
Possibly the salvation of the human race. We simply must expand our habitat. We've filled up the earth.
Do you really think that you'll live to see them?
I could if human beings decided to do it. I think the chances of their deciding to do it fast enough to have it within my lifetime is less than 50%.
Extraterrestrial intelligence.
No way of knowing for sure. We can assume that there is some, but we cannot tell when we'll actually meet them, tomorrow or never.
Nuclear fusion.
One of the two great hopes of humanity, if we can make it work.
Recombinant DNA.
Which is probably more feared than it should be, but the fear itself is a real thing, and perhaps in order to work on recombinant DNA with complete comfort, we ought to have the laboratories established in orbit about the Earth.
Oh, that's interesting. Weather control.
Well, that's an extremely difficult thing because weather is such a complex thing. If you control it in one place, what effect do you have it in another place? I honestly think it's not going to work unless we weather condition the entire globe, and this isn't going to be soon.
Nuclear war.
Absolutely unthinkable. Since we're not going to really survive nuclear war as a civilization, it should be simply off the board completely.
The molecular basis of memory.
I wish I knew, really. It's such a subtle thing. From my own experience, I know that I can tell something I remember instantly, but I must have riffled through a card file somewhere in my brain, and I remember an awful lot of things. How did I manage to get through the card file so quickly?
It's incredible.
I haven't the faintest idea how it's done. I haven't the faintest idea how I do it.
Do you know about this new idea that Julian Jaynes at Princeton has put forth that, say, 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, people were all schizophrenics? We heard voices.
Yes, I heard that, and I can't make myself believe it. It seems to me if it weren't for the Bible, for instance, it would never even occur to anybody that this was so. It's just that you have to explain how come in the past God spoke to people and now he doesn't. Of course, to me, it seems easier to suppose that people made up those myths.
Farming the ocean.
I don't think that this will really add a great deal to the food supply of the world, and we can't place too much hopes in that.
Black holes.
That's the most exciting thing in cosmology right now. But it's going to be so difficult to find out anything about it because it may be that the nearest black holes are extremely far away, that we can't ever study them in any detail, that we can't even work out the theory in any detail because we have nothing with which to approach them, so that they're liable to be there teasing cosmologists for centuries.
That's great stuff for science fiction, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Control of aging.
Well, this is something that everyone would like on a personal basis. Nobody wants to grow old. Everyone thinks that he or she wants to live forever. But it strikes me to be a bad thing for the species to have the same generation forever alive. The whole point, I think, of human history is that you get rid of the old people and you bring in the new people. The youth must be served, etc., etc. Now, as an old man, I haven't changed my mind. I recognize that we must get young brains in on the job.
Isaac, I want to thank you very much for being on 90 Minutes Live. And just before we close, I wonder if you could give us your limerick on satyriasis.
Oh, how does that go? The title was So-and-so and I, you know, it was the two of us. It went, there's something about satyriasis that arouses psychiatrists' biases, but we're very pleased that we're so diseased as the girl who is ready to try us is.
Isaac Asimov, thank you very much.
It's my pleasure to be here, Dave.